The time period between Easter and Pentecost in the early church was called the time of Goja. That's your $100 theological word for the day. So if anybody, if you're in a conversation and you don't know what to say, just throw the word out and it'll totally mystify that. It doesn't necessarily mean you even have to know what it is. Just use it and they'll be quite impressed with you, all right? Quite a number of years ago, in the middle of the afternoon one day, two people came to the door. It was August. And I thought, who the heck is knocking on my door in the middle of August? And I looked out and I immediately recognized the two people as representing Jehovah's Witness Church. So I stepped out and they said, we'd like to talk to you about the book of Revelation. And I said, I didn't tell them who I was or what I knew about scripture. I said, that's my favorite book of the Bible. And they looked at me a little in shock at this point and said, well, what do you know about it? Well, that was the worst question. For the next 25 minutes, I told them everything I knew about the book of Revelation. They never came back to my house. That guy knows too much. We're not going. The time of Goja was for those who had been baptized at Easter. And the idea was that they spent 40 days before Easter preparing to be baptized. And in the middle of that, they're going through a lot of personal struggle. What does this mean to be baptized into Jesus? What is it going to mean to me and my job and my family and where I live and my relationships with others? What is it going to mean to me that I'm now a follower of Jesus, or what would become known as a Christian? What is that all going to mean? So they don't really have much time to think about what the content, if you will, of what being a Christian would ultimately mean. Remember, this is a time when everything's in a turmoil and upheaval, really, in the first few centuries of the life of the Christian community. So the time of Goja was now a post-baptismal reflection, so that they had a chance, like Pat does with the children here. What is this? What do you think this is? Well, what is the meaning of this? Well, why this? So they're asking those kinds of questions, and it gave time for the teacher, for the leader to respond to them in some form or fashion. Goja actually means the mysteries, or the deeper reflection or journey into the mysteries into which you were baptized. That was the idea. Now remember that at least for the first 200 to 300 years, up to the time of Constantine, when in 312 he issues what's called Edict of Milan. And the Edict of Milan then gave recognition to the followers of Jesus, to Christians, that they could now legally practice their faith in the open in the Roman Empire. It was not yet fully recognized, but it gave enough to take the burden of persecution off of their backs. Because for the first 300 years of the life of the followers of Jesus, they were intensely persecuted. Persecuted in the beginning by their fellow Jews who really said, you guys are putting us Jews into a place that we don't want to be with the Romans. We want to keep the peace with Romans, but you are disturbing the apple cart with the Romans constantly, and now they're after us too. So the followers of Jesus were being persecuted. There's various texts that say that they were kicked out of the synagogues and out of the temple worship. That gives evidence to that point. But the Christians, one, not just because they didn't want to worship the emperor as a god, which was part of it, but it may be interesting to know that the Christians refused induction into the Roman army. So that they absolutely, sort of like that song we had at the beginning during the Vietnam protest and all of that, right? Well, people went off to Canada because they didn't want to accept going into the military. I remember those of you who were in that time period. Oh my gosh! Every time that the draft numbers came out, all of us in high school got worried and anxious as to where our number was going to fall out. And nobody really talked openly about what would happen if we were in the top 100 or so. And I don't even remember what mine came up as. But in any event, the Christians were persecuted because they refused induction into the Roman army, because they took so seriously the command not to kill, not to take up arms, not to engage in acts of violence, that they just refused outright induction into the Roman army. They were the early conscientious objectors, if that was possible in the Roman Empire, but that's what they did. And so they were under intense persecution. One, because the Romans just didn't understand how this group of people could survive welcoming everyone. You know, the question that, well, where do all these sheep come from? And you hear it in Revelation, right? People from every race, every nation, everywhere. So that the vision of Christianity early on was one of inclusion and embracing everyone, which was not really, even though the practice in the Roman Empire was when they conquered people, they recognized them, accepting their gods and goddesses and system and everything, so that there was at least some tolerance during the time of the Roman Empire for people who were different from the Romans themselves. But in any event, the Romans just didn't quite understand what the Christians were about and what they were doing, right? And the human response to that which you don't understand, because you're ignorant of them, because you don't take the time to learn anything about them, is to respond with hate and violence against them. And that was unleashed primarily in the 200s under the time of the Emperor Diocletian. Now imagine, in those first 300 years of Christian, you want to become a Christian? And this is what potentially can happen to you. That you're going to end up dead. You're going to lose your job. You may lose your family. You're going to lose your social location. You're going to have to move to wherever out at the ends of the world at that time. So the intensity of persecution, imagine being baptized in the year 200 when the persecution of Diocletian is going full rage across the entire empire. Imagine what's going to sustain me as a Christian in that time period. Well, it's one thing to have the words of the Bible and the words of Jesus, but I need a little bit more to hang my hat on, if you will, in order to really be committed in what I'm going to do as a Christian, in living my life in the world. And so this vision from the book of Revelation, and this is really where it comes from. It's very simple. It's not a complex book, although it sounds like it. I often think that the writer of this book must have gotten into a boatload of peyote or whatever it might have been that he was smoking, during the 60s, going off to a shrub somewhere, smoking off with the whatever, anyway. Because it just is like, this is just unimaginable, these visions that he had. But you see embedded in it, and that's what gets missed. If you watch the super evangelical fundamentalist Christian stations are going on and on and on about the end of the world and the end times, and they use Revelation to promote that. Well, that's not what it's about at all. Very simply put, that it's meant to be a statement of reality. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and Christians are dying as a result of their faith and their belief at the hands of the terrible beast of Rome. What's going to sustain us? What's this vision? Look again at that vision today in the first reading. The vision is that those who manage, whether alive or die at the hands of the Romans, they're going to be the ones who ultimately will be victorious in the end. They've got the white garments. And by the way, you baptized a child recently, or in your memory of children being baptized, that babies were baptized with white baptismal garments. That's what this is connected to. That the garment recognized that you are now putting on the new life of Christ. Great-great-grandmother might have had it, and that's all that you think about it. But it's really, and that the neophytes, those who were baptized at Easter in those first 300 years, they basically were expected, and so it's like putting a mark on your back. They were expected to go around with white garments on after baptism. And the white garments were only to be taken off at the time of Pentecost. Imagine, 50 days you have to go around to the office, to the grocery store in a white garment. What kind of crazy person does that? Well, I guess if you're smoking peyote or marijuana somewhere, I guess maybe it doesn't matter to you. But in any event, that this vision says, you know what? You're doing this for a reason and a purpose. You're wearing this garment because it symbolizes not defeat, not death, but this garment symbolizes the victory of Jesus over death. And even though you're experiencing death all around you, you're going to still be victorious in the end. I was thinking about sitting here listening to it. I wonder if it's possible that the remaining people in that steel mill in Mariupol and Ukraine, would this vision help them to endure? Would this vision help any of them in the Ukraine or wherever there's experiences like this? Would this vision enable them to persevere and to remain strong even if they end up dead at the end? Well, the hope of the book of Revelation was, yes, it would be enough. And you're right, we may die because we believe this way. But that's okay because we still are victorious even in death because of Jesus. And besides the fact that if you see how the scripture unfolds, it says, and oh, by the way, in that place that you're going, it may not be now, but in that future place where victory will be the only thing that has mattered to us, that there isn't going to be the kind of suffering that we're experiencing. There won't be tears, there won't be pain, there won't be death, there won't be hunger, there won't be thirst. Why? Because we're in the reign of God. We've gotten to the goal that we all have been working hard to think about. That we'll get there and everything will be transformed and changed. Now running through my head is that crazy song that my radio station plays every day, A Horse with No Name. You all know that one, right? And he goes through the desert, and oh my God, this is terrible. And then all of a sudden he goes, whoa, look at this. There's a river, and there's lush grass, and he releases the horse to run on its own. Wow, look at that. That's what it's talking about. It's like the shepherd leads the sheep. I mean, you know why that's important in that story? This is hard for city dwellers, right? To get the idea about sheep. Hard because what do we know about sheep, right? I remember in New Zealand, our tour bus got stopped because there were thousands of sheep crossing the road, and it's like, oh my God. And all of a sudden, one jumped, and pretty soon they're all jumping. We asked, well, why are they jumping? Well, because the first one imagined that there was some obstacle in the road, so all the others started doing it too. They didn't know why they were doing it. So the shepherd has to lead the sheep because the sheep don't eat the grass down to the bare nub, killing it. So they have to be moved along. And unfortunately, I've seen the shepherds in the Middle East. The shepherds aren't in front of the sheep. Because why? Because if the shepherd's in front of the sheep, all graciousness to the scripture and to Jesus. If the shepherd's in front of the sheep, have you ever thought about that? If the shepherd's in front of the sheep, he's thinking that they're all following him. Well, they're not. Because they saw good grass, they're stopping, and he's way ahead of them, and they're not following. Where's the shepherd? Behind. Keep moving along, keep moving along. He's pushing them from behind. And Isn't that an interesting thought? That the shepherd is one, yes, maybe thinking out front, but sometimes the shepherd is somebody who stands behind, pushing. Keep going, there's better grass down the way. Keep going, don't eat it all down to the nuts. Keep going, the shepherd keeps pushing. So that in this vision that the people in the time of the newly baptized and neophytes in the time of this Goja are getting not only the vision that they have to keep in front of them, because if they don't keep in front of them, it becomes very easy to give it all up. Imagine, you've lost your job, maybe your family, you don't have a home, you're out on the street, you don't have anything to eat, and you go, wow, this is what I get for becoming a Christian. You go, forget this. Next week, I'm going off someplace else. There's a better offer by the Romans over here. And so that was always a threat. And it's interesting, even in the modern times, that with all of the people who were joining the church and being baptized, some statistics show that within a year, 50% of those who have been received in the church and baptized stopped coming. I don't know why, they just do. Maybe it wasn't what they were looking for. Maybe it didn't answer all the questions. Maybe it didn't resolve all their issues for them, but they just stopped coming. Maybe like our own children, right? Our own children that you spend all the time working with them and teaching them and educating them and preparing them and sharing faith with them and loving them and caring for them. And for whatever reason, they just stop. Whatever. That's a whole nother thing. But the point in this story is that you keep the vision and you have to hold on to it, even if what you've got is totally opposite that vision. Death, despair, hopelessness. Because that's a part of what Christianity is about, that you keep the hope alive even in spite of the evidence against it. So here's the transition. Because the point of the story of the Good Shepherd says that the shepherd knows how can I say this? The shepherd knows, maybe because by the way, most of the shepherds in the Middle East are women, not men. You know why? Because the men are doing the work over in the factories, that the women are the ones, the girls, the young girls in the family are the ones who are shepherds. You never get that, right? In the history of the church, that shepherds are always men, right? Always men. Why? Well, because, just like in Sojourner Truth, well, because you think that Jesus was a man, so men have to always be the leaders, right? Men are always the leaders. Because why? Because women can't be leaders. Think about that. So that in the story, the shepherd has an understanding of hunger, has an understanding of thirst, has an understanding that if somebody isn't there to either walk along with or to gently urge and push along, then the shepherd realizes that there isn't going to be much life at that point. And so the shepherd wants the best for the sheep, wants the best in terms of life, and if I could use the word prosperity or a flourishing, that's better. That the shepherd knows that if the sheep find good grass and water and are well cared for, that they will flourish. Now let me tell you this story. Sometimes preachers, you have to always be careful of revealing too much about yourself, because if you reveal something about yourself, see, the members of the congregation go, we know about that. We know this. So when I was a little kid, probably not much older than the children here, well, needless to say, I had a pretty big temper. And I believe that as an only child, it always should go my way. I was the one that should always get everything. And so it didn't happen that way, and I would get very upset and lose control, and I would be out of control. And one day that happened. And I remember this because it was so powerful an experience that my mother grabbed me. And usually if you've had a child that's out of control, the worst thing you can do is grab them and hold them. Because it just made me resist even more. And she grabbed me and held me and pulled her close to me and just held on while I was struggling to get free. And she just kept holding me to the point where obviously I began to calm down. But to this day, what I think calmed me down was that she held me so close to her breast and her beating heart that it was her gentle breathing and the beating of her heart that actually calmed me down. I want to ask, is that leadership? I ask because you see that when leaders are always thought about needing to have power and control and to exercise authority, that it becomes very easy for us to think that women or mothers have no leadership capabilities. And not that things would be so completely different if women could be in leadership positions, as sometimes are thought of, because running through my mind is the biblical woman Jezebel, who is not noted for being a good person, or even the Iron Maiden, right, Margaret Thatcher, that sometimes even women who get into leadership positions begin to exercise authoritarian power and control. So that's the concern. But the other concern is, I think right now the image in my mind is Mother Teresa, if you know who Mother Teresa was. That the way that she entered into Indian society, especially among the untouchables, that her total commitment to be the example of Jesus to those poor, and to recognize in them that they, even if the whole world rejected them, that they were in the divine image and likeness, that she treated them with such dignity and respect, that even if they died because she couldn't cure their disease, that they died knowing that someone did love them and did care for them. I have images. I was an awful, not awful, but a real severe introvert. And remember several times my grandmother in particular, who lived with us, saying, remember how I gave you the image of the shepherd behind? Go on, go on, go on. And me, and I'll go on. And then I think of the time that she put me on the public service bus. I was in kindergarten and I got to school on the public service bus. And she put me on the bus in my Halloween costume. And I was dressed as a clown. And what do you think, for however old you are in kindergarten, getting on a public bus, and all the people on the bus laughed at me, but I thought they were laughing at me. They were probably going, wow, isn't this cute? Look at this kid getting on the public bus. And then the bus driver getting off and taking me by the hand, stopping in front of the school and taking me by the hand and took me up to the door of the school. Wow, I don't think that would ever happen anymore, right? I guess I'm trying to move to the idea that on this day, Mother's Day, that with all of its, did you know that the founder of Mother's Day eventually rejected the celebration of Mother's Day? Did you know that? Because she believed it had become so commercialized that the whole idea of recognizing women and motherhood and what all of that's about, that she totally said, this is wrong. We've gone down the wrong path with this. Millions of dollars are spent on this day without necessarily the recognition of the leadership that women and mothers have in our own lives and need to have in the world when we still are committed to only thinking in male terms and masculine terms. So that today I've always thought that it's not just about motherhood. My 4 aunts were married and had no children. Would I still think of them as being mothers? Well, not biological mothers, but if we think of the characteristics of the shepherd who himself or herself knew what was needed, yes, they were, because they had compassion, they had love, they had the spirit of nurturing me, nurturing others. They had the leadership qualities that was needed to not only be women of faith and leadership, but also to be mothers. And so that's what I want us to think about, this vision that moves us gently with the shepherd, the woman, the mother, pushing us to keep the vision strong, but to also see along the journey, the way, what's necessary for the flourishing of our lives in the world.